Cafe, your podcasting source of great crime, suspense, and thriller writing. I'm your host, Debbi Mack. Before I bring on my guest, I'll just remind you that the Crime Cafe has 2 ebooks for sale, the 9-book box set and the short story anthology. You can find the buy links for both on my website, debbimack.com, under the Crime Cafe link. You can also get a free copy of either book if you become a Patreon supporter. You'll get that and much more if you support the podcast on Patreon, along with our eternal gratitude for doing so. But first, let me put in a good word for Blueberry Podcasting. I'm a Blueberry affiliate, but that's not the only reason I'm telling you this. I've been using Blueberry Podcasting as my hosting service for my podcast for years, and it's one of the best decisions I ever made. They give great customer service. You're in complete control of your own podcast. You can run it from your own website, and it just takes a lot of the work out of podcasting for me. I find for that reason that it's a company that I can get behind 100% and say, you should try this. Try Blueberry. It doesn't require a long-term contract, and it's just a great company, period. And it also has free technical support by email, video, and phone, so you can get a human being there. Isn't that nice? Hi, everyone. My guest today is an award-winning true crime author, podcaster, attorney, and television journalist. She writes about violent subcultures, such as outlaw motorcycle gangs, and about criminal pathology. She's appeared on numerous television documentaries and shows. Her books have been adapted to create the show Gangland Undercover and have been optioned for film. It's my pleasure to have with me today Kerrie Droban. Hey, Kerrie, how you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I think I can do it. There we go. Awesome. I'm so glad you're here with us today. I was just checking your website, and I was fascinated to see that you grew up in a, quote, spy family, unquote. What was that like?
I did. I know everybody asked me that. It was actually perfect backdrop for true crime, and really sort of set the ball in motion, unbeknownst to me until a lot of years later. But, I grew up in a family of secrets and undercover operations. And, I really didn't know anything about what my parents did until I was 17. And so it really just sort of set this whole career in motion of, well, what is that? What does that do to somebody who lives in a duplicitous world where you're not really sure what's real, what isn't real? What are the stakes of keeping secrets and living in a family where you, at one point, on one occasion, you have to protect them while they're trying to protect you at the same time. And, you really just don't really know who to trust and who your confidences are. And it was an interesting world. And I had 2 brothers. And so neither, my brothers and I, none of us really knew what the other knew. So it was one of those was sort of compounded duplicity. You couldn't really ask. And so we sort of lived in a world of walking on eggshells, not really knowing, who knew what and what was real.
Oh my gosh. What a background to have as a person getting into crime writing of any sort.
Yes. Yes, it was perfect.
Boy, yeah. And you got a master's in writing, essentially, from the writing seminar program at Johns Hopkins University first, before you went to law
Yes.
school.
Yes, I started out actually as a poet. I mean,
Ah,
that's a very circuitous route into true crime, but I wound up honing my skills as a poet and realized you really can't make a living as a poet. And unless I wanted to be a poetry professor, I really wasn't going to go very far with poetry. And so that's what, launched me into law school.
that's interesting because I had a similar story, except it was with history. I was a
Oh,
journalism major, and I thought about getting a master's in history and decided, I should probably, I don't really plan on teaching history.
yeah.
Ended up in law school.
Oh, wow.
Funny how that happens.
I know. It's sort of like your practical brain says, okay, how are you going to actually feed yourself? And
Exactly.
poverty was not fun.
Oh God. I can
So,
name some classes that were totally not fun. I hated estates and trusts for one thing. Oh,
yeah, yeah,
Lord, Lord.
yeah.
Let's see. So, oh, I read your guest post and I thought it was really good.
Yeah,
I wanted to recommend that everybody read it. What
thank
struck me
you.
about it was the sense that it's like kind of the general sense that psychopaths can't really be fixed as such, in any sense that we would normally think of fixing a person. And in fact, we have to be better educated to avoid being in danger from them. That's
Right.
kind of what seemed to be your point. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on how the environmental factors might affect a person in becoming a psychopath, might
Yeah,
actually
I mean,
influence that.
it's a subject that has fascinated me for a very long time, and of course, it blends in really well with true crime writing and being a criminal defense attorney and being a family law lawyer. And what struck me really kind of starkly in practicing in this area is that people really didn't have an understanding of that kind of pathology. And when you don't understand psychopathy, then you really don't know how to, number one, litigate it, address it, send, judges don't know how to appropriate sentences, victims don't know how to survive this. I mean, it becomes this sort of you know escalating ball that that really can take you into areas that are not even helpful. And so,
Yeah,
so to answer your question, it's a whole nature nurture question. Are psychopaths born? Are they made? And I think the consensus, and in fact, most of the research that I've done is they are really born that way.
mm,
And so because of that, I mean, and they're different. It's a very nuanced personality disorder. It's, oftentimes it's sort of interchanged with verbiage like sociopaths or narcissists, or people will just say it as sort of hyperbole. Oh, he's such a psychopath. But, I think it's really important to understand what that personality disorder is in order to know how to address it. And particularly in the litigation area. I mean, I've seen people, lawyers, judges, victims become re-traumatized, re-abused by the very system that's designed to protect them. So, and the reason it's important to understand that environment doesn't necessarily play a factor is because you don't want to, wind up blaming the victim, blaming the parents of, the child who might be born that way. Or what do you do in, when you're faced with, I mean, we have so much teen violence now, which is really hard to comprehend, hard to wrap your brain around. I mean, what do you do with them? Do you try them as adults? Do you rehabilitate? We're a nation that really wants to rehabilitate criminals. And I know this sounds weird coming from a defense attorney, but
it's
I'm
okay.
like a imposter defense attorney. Actually, I don't believe that rehabilitation can actually help somebody who is a psychopath, and the common other terminology for this antisocial personality disorder. I mean, when I was a capital lawyer, that was sort of the kiss of death diagnosis, where if somebody was antisocial personality disorder, there was no cure, there was no helping them. And so then, you talk about, well, how do you keep other people safe from them?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a very good question. Where do you land on something like the death penalty?
So interesting, because I was a capital lawyer for about 15 years and really, started litigating in those areas, mostly on the appellate post-conviction side. And so I would see them after they were convicted and after they had gone through these lengthy mitigation hearings where you would see the lawyers presenting, really umpteen factors in their childhood that could have contributed to the way they became, things like, oh, they had domestic violence in the family, they had abuse, they had trauma, they had sexual abuse, you name it. And how did that impact the later crime? And so, you know with I actually stopped being a capital lawyer when I got to the one case that just I couldn't do anything with. And I had to get off of that case because, in my opinion, it was the first time that I actually encountered what I would describe as a true psychopath.
Mm.
There was no way to help this person. And I felt just from a moral, ethical standpoint, there was really nothing that I could authentically argue to help my client. And I really believed, and this was sort of my moral crisis at the time, or my ethical crisis, I really believed that if I continued to, I couldn't represent him because I really
Mhm.
believed that he deserved to die. And that is so stunning for me to be able to say that as a defense attorney. But it really sort of flipped everything on its head for me. And I started to really reevaluate the work that I was doing, why I was doing it, why this particular defendant was different from the other ones that I'd represented, and what made him different. And so that's what sort of launched me on this whole trajectory of, well, maybe there's another way of, analyzing these cases.
This is great. I mean, I just love hearing this from a defense lawyer because we don't get to hear enough from defense lawyers, I think. A lot of people have this picture of them as sleazy or something like that. And I just, they're not.
They're not. It's such a tough job. It's a really
It's a
tough job.
tough job. Yes.
So, and I think a lot, and actually that sort of launched me into a whole nother sort of area of like the ripple effect of representing people like this, representing psychopaths, what does it do to the lawyers? Well, I think lawyers need to be trained in that area as well and not
Hmm.
just spit out the party line of let's do all of this mitigation when sometimes there isn't mitigation. It doesn't exist. As in the case of the one client I had to withdraw from, there was nothing. And that's what led me to conclude, evil is not a mental illness. And I really went on this sort of like, soapbox of like, let's not conflate the two terms because they're not the same and they deserve to be treated differently. And I think it's really important for a defense lawyer any lawyer, but really a defense lawyer. And the reason I say that is because psychopaths will manipulate anyone. They'll
Hmm.
manipulate the judges, their lawyers, the juries, and they will get away with it. And they will use the courtroom as another method of manipulation. And so, unless you are really attuned to that, you're going to fall right into that trap. And it
Ooh.
has happened to colleagues of mine. It's happened to, and the ripple effect stays with you like forever. I mean, you can get roped into it. And the classic case that I always think of is my colleague who represented Jodi Arias, and all of the fallout that he went through of having to represent somebody like that. I mean, what's important for I'm sure that your viewers understand this, that a lot of defense attorneys that represent capital clients, like 99% of them are court appointed. So we don't pick and choose who the clients are. And so if somebody is assigned to a truly vile person, okay, and I can think of, for example, James Holmes, the mass shooter of Colorado movie theater killer shooter. Okay, the attorneys that represented James Holmes, the defense lawyers, I mean, they were vilified. They were hated by the public. It was almost as if they were an extension of James Holmes, which
Hmm.
is really an unfair characterization, but it happens quite often to defense lawyers. And it really, I think, can have a psychological toll on
Yes.
practicing in that area. And I think that's really important too, to sort of, have the public understand that they're not like extensions of their client, they're not,
Yeah.
um, just because they're out there defending somebody like that. I mean, everybody deserves a defense, and all that stuff. But I think it's really important to understand, the kind of client that you're dealing with, how they're going to manipulate everything that you say or do in the courtroom. And that's really what sort of my path has taken me on, like all of this true crime stuff. And I mean, I've really been fascinated by that. Like, what is that ripple effect? What does it do to people? What does it do to the community? What does it do to the lawyers representing them?
Those are great questions. And yeah, really, what does it do to the community as well as the lawyers? I mean, that's got to take a toll on your psyche after a while. One of the questions I had for you was if you ever got depressed doing this work.
Yes. I mean, I think that I would be lying if I said I didn't. I mean, I think that what was really key for me in doing capital work, and then of course doing true crime work, and really starting to drill down into some of these really dangerous characters, was to make sure that I had my own balance.
Yeah.
Like I didn't let it absorb me. And I realized, I mean, you have to realize when it is absorbing you. You have to realize when it's important to step away, to practice mindfulness, to recognize that this is not your identity. Just because you're representing somebody who embodies like the worst of the worst, it's not who you are. You don't have to take it on. I mean, it's easy to say that, but I'll be honest, I was in therapy for many years. And so I mean, like, it was like probably the only thing that kept me going was, having some kind of sounding board where I'd go in. It's almost like I know this sounds kind of tongue in cheek, but they have the scenes in The Sopranos where he goes to see his therapist. Well, it's really true. It's that kind of relationship where you go to your therapist, you say, listen, I do something really strange and a lot of people don't understand it. And I can't talk to anybody about it because, everything's confidential, right? It's secret. So you can't, talk to your client about how your client's affecting you. You can't talk to anybody really,
Yeah.
maybe the state bar, maybe the ethics committee, but not really because, it's just not that kind of thing where you can divulge anything personal about what you're going through with respect to what your client's facing. So it's a very interesting sort of private, hellish world, but it did remind me in a lot of ways of, that Soprano scene. Well, he has many scenes where he goes to see his therapist. It's all in
Yes. Yes, yes. Um, what authors have most inspired your own writing?
Oh, it's interesting because even though I am a true crime writer, I don't read a lot of true crime. I find I have to like really step away from that. And so I am very fascinated by memoirs.
Mm.
And I absolutely love, reading about other people's lives and other people's experiences because I really believe that we can learn so much from shared stories. And I admire the courage that it takes a lot of these writers. And one that comes to mind is Glennon Melton Doyle, who's one of my favorite writers. And what I love about her is her authentic voice, how she can just completely 100% be herself and not worry about how other people are going to perceive her. And
Mm.
I find that so courageous and so fascinating. And I don't know how she does it, but she does it. And it's amazing to me. And so I'm very intrigued by that. Another one is Cheryl Strayed, who is
Oh
the
yeah.
Wild, who I just, the fact that she could take one experience, out of just a terrible tragedy in her life and not let it define her life, but show you how she moved through it. And I just, what I love about those two authors in particular is that they're not celebrities, they're not like out there in, I mean, now they are in the public eye, but at the time they weren't, and this was just a slice of their life that they were willing to share with the world. And because they did that, we all gained something from it. And I remember reading Cheryl Strayed's book and thinking, at the time I was going through some very traumatic experience in my own life. And I thought, wow, if I had not found her book, I don't know that I would have had the same sort of, epiphanies that I had coming
Mm.
out of my own tragedy. And so I find that such courageous writing. And it reminds me in a lot of ways of because there are times where I come back to, okay, true crime writing. I mean, we have as and I don't know if it's a worldwide phenomenon. It might be, but I'm just going to say the American phenomenon. We have savage appetites for crime. And it really sort of made me think about that a lot on a sort of an academic level. Like, what is it about it that really draws us in? And predominantly women. I mean, they make up the main audience of true crime, which is even more fascinating to me.
Why do you
That
think that is?
well, I mean, there are many theories on it, but I think in a lot of respects, it's sort of that idea of, I'm not much of a roller coaster rider and I don't like riding roller coasters, but it's that idea of being on a roller coaster, being able to have the thrill of almost, in my opinion, almost dying from the speed and the whipping around things, but knowing that you're not going to. So,
Mm.
so for a woman who is and I hate to say this, in all likelihood going to be, the target of a predator, or, likely more likely than a man, for example, to be a victim of a crime. For women, it's that sort of, I'm going to sit in the comfort of my living room. It's like watching a horror film unfold, and I'm going to see this play out on a screen. So I'm protected, but I'm watching it, and maybe I will learn something. Like I will learn something about the pathology of that predator. I will learn something about, how that victim became a victim, and what can I take away from it. And so that's always brings me back to why I write true crime, and why I I devote so much of my time to doing podcasts of it, is that I really believe that there is a fine line between entertainment and education. I think that it's such an important vehicle to be able to educate people about these different pathologies, and about, like, if this happened to, this woman, what could you do differently? What could you learn from this? And what can you take away from it? And I think that, but the one thing I will say about true crime that I really would love to see a turn in, which I haven't seen too much of yet, um, is to not have the victim be a footnote. And I
Mm.
think that that's something that really does need to change. It's like not sensationalizing so much the killer or the predator, or making that such the focal point, even though it's really important to know that sort of pathology. I think in many respects, it's really important not to forget the victim that this happened
Mhm.
to, and they have a life, and how did it impact that? Again, that's that ripple effect. How did it impact that community, that person? I mean, taking one precious life out of that, and how did it change the trajectory of so many lives? So it's really sort of a double-edged coin.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. What kind of writing schedule do you keep? And how much time do you spend on writing versus, say, the podcast?
Well, I think I'm a little bit probably insane that way, a little ADHD. um, I I have kept the schedule probably, oh my gosh, for as long as I can remember, really, and it just sort of became my biorhythm. But I get up at 4 every morning, and I work from about 4 to 7, and then I go to my day job, which is law. And I really try to compartmentalize those two, because it's too difficult to bring them into the same space. So, I really focus on writing. And by writing, it doesn't necessarily have to be, being physically at a typewriter writing something. It can be thinking about an idea. It can be going for a walk. It can be reading something, watching something. I get a lot of inspiration from watching documentaries. And then now that I have these two podcasts, so one of my podcasts, Crime Standstill, deals with it. Started out of a case that I represented a woman for 15 years who I believe was wrongfully convicted. And I was actually her post conviction lawyer. And so at the end of the day, she said to me, there's nothing left that you can do in the legal system. So what can you do in a different media platform? And I had never really thought about podcasting until I got to her case. And I thought, you know what? Her case is so interesting, so compelling. I think I'm going to start there. So I started by telling her story and offering different legal theories and different perspectives, different new evidence that the jury never heard. And so that became that platform. And so that was kind of easy to do and fun to do, because I already had all the research. But the other one I do is Crime Bites, where I just do kind of snippets of what's in the headlines, and I offer it from a defense attorney's perspective. What would I see legally that maybe an audience doesn't get from, another podcaster? Like, what can I offer that's different? And so I do spend quite a bit of time on that one because I have to, number one, find the case and figure out what's interesting about it. Like, I don't want to just talk about a case that's sensational, but I will talk about something that is in the news and maybe offer a different perspective.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's quite a bit of work. So I devote maybe 2 days a week to researching and writing those scripts and doing those podcasts, and then the rest of the time as a lawyer. So it's a
Wow.
juggling act.
It must be quite a juggling act. Ooh, I really admire your determination and persistence there, and your work ethic. That's great. Um, let's see. What advice would you give to anyone who is interested in having a writing career?
Well, the one thing that I would say to somebody that I wish somebody had said to me was do not expect it to replace your day job, at
Yeah.
least not for a very long time. And if you're very, very lucky, because you cannot or shouldn't, I think, be doing it for the money
Hmm.
because is not there. And it's not there for a variety of reasons. And it has, and 90% of the time has nothing to do with the quality or time expended on your book. It's just a fact. There's so many books out there. The publishers take the lion's share of the royalties. And so it can be very frustrating. And so I'm traditionally published, so I can't really speak for the self-publishing arena, but being published traditionally, it's been a very sobering experience. It's been, while they certainly have a wide distribution and they get your books in a lot of places and it's, fun to see that, you lose a lot of control over the creative project. You really don't see a lot of money from it.
That's
And
right.
yeah, and that's why I'm still a lawyer. So I get asked that all the time, like, why do you still do this? I'm like, well, because I have to. I mean,
People have this notion that somehow you come out with a book and suddenly you're a millionaire. No, it's not the way it works at all.
no,
That's
you have to.
definitely true for self-published. I can tell you that from a personal perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that from experience. Let's see, is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish up?
The only other thing that I would add is, you know, in addition to just doing it because you have a passion for it, I mean, don't write to the market necessarily, but write to what you are absolutely passionate about because you're going to spend so much time working on it, rewriting it, editing, no matter what, no matter if you're self-published or traditionally published, it is going to consume your life for a couple of years at least. And so be prepared for that and be sure that you really love what you're doing. And the last piece of thing I would say is don't read the reviews.
Yeah, yeah,
Just don't read them
absolutely.
because
Yeah,
people will write whatever. They haven't tried to write a book, and so they're just going to be trolls in a lot of cases. So,
the heck with them.
yeah, don't
Ignore
read
that kind of stuff.
them.
If there are people out there who like you, that's enough, isn't it?
Right.
Have that crew of people who like you. So anyway, well, thank you so much for being here. And this was a great talk, and I could probably talk for an hour about this, but unfortunately, I don't have the time. Zoom
Well,
won't let me.
thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. This
Oh,
is great.
I'm pleased to do it. Believe me, it's always nice to have a lawyer on too, especially a defense lawyer. I love defense lawyers. So
Thank
not that I don't like prosecutors. I know they have a very important job.
you.
But yeah, defense lawyers really take it on the chin sometimes, and I like to defend them.
Yeah, thank you.
So in any case, I just want to thank everyone who's listening. If you would please leave a review if you enjoyed the episode. And also, we have a Patreon page with perks for supporters. So check that out. And with that, I'll just say take care. And until next time, happy reading.